Hi, this is Eric Regensberger, and welcome to another episode of the Clarinet Connection, your source for gear and product reviews and practice and performance tips for the clarinet. Today we're going to talk about tip number 9 and 10 in 24 tips for better clarinet playing. In today's episode, we're going to focus on how to tackle difficult passages. We've all seen long runs or difficult rhythmical passages that just present problems for any clarinet player. So today I'm going to give you some tips about how to practice and approach those particular sections. And we're also going to look at music memorization because really one doesn't work without the other. So let's dive into it and see how we tackle difficult passages. Today's selection that we're going to focus on is a run near the beginning of Saint-Saëns' Introduction and Rondo Capriccioso. And this particular piece of music has been transcribed from violin, so as you can imagine, it has some pretty challenging runs in it. The one we're going to take a look at is a series of 30-second notes. There are 40 notes in the passage. And so what I'll help you through is what your approach generally should be for difficult music, how to identify patterns, and then how to memorize the music to make it easier to remember. All right, let's take a look at the second to last line of the first page of the Saint-Saëns. And as you can see, this particular passage is just an up and down run starting on a high E. And so rather than attack this at first with a metronome, what we're going to do is go really slow and just work out the finger patterns and how your fingers should move in conjunction with each other. That's really the key thing to being able to play music fast, especially 30-second notes like are in this passage. So the first thing that we're going to do is just play really slowly through the music, but we're not going to play the entire run all the way through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the first, let's say, 5 notes, and then I'm going to start on the second of the notes and play the first effectively second through 6 notes, etc., etc. So here's how it might sound. So you can see what I am doing is I'm just progressively moving the start of my little section of 4, 5, 6 notes, one note progressively each time that I play. So the idea is that you want to really learn the finger positions and movements from one note to another, okay? And this playing it this slow will also give you an idea of where your trouble spots might be. And in a minute, we'll talk about how to address those trouble spots. All right, once we've played through literally that slowly, we're next going to pick up the pace a little bit and again, play these in little chunks. Okay, now we're going to add a metronome. All right, I would pick a relatively slow tempo to begin with, and we'll look at something like, say, 40 beats a minute. Okay? And then we'll add some eighth notes in there so that we don't have such a slow beat. So the idea behind using the metronome is so that you, one, can lock in a tempo. You'll ultimately get a feel for where the actual tempo is going to be. This is a fairly slow piece to begin with, so ultimately we're not going to get much past 50 to 55 beats a minute anyway. But the idea, again, is to have those beats in your mind so that the gaps, each note gets its proper value. In other words, we're not guessing where the note should be in that rhythmic pattern. So let's, as we bump up, okay, we'll bump up the tempo to say 46. Okay, and we'll keep doing this in order to improve the speed. Now, the key is really not to pick that fast a tempo when you are first learning this. You don't want to just keep moving from 40 to 50 to 60 to 80 or wherever you're trying to get to the first day. You really want to give this some time. The idea is that your fingers learn where they need to go. If you play it through too fast, you're going to get kind of a muddled mess. And as you can see, that's not what we want. So the idea is to really practice in nice even tempos, get the finger feeling where all those finger placements need to go. And then once we figure out, all right, where are the real trouble spots? That's where we really need to kind of spend some time really hashing it out. The first part is just simply part of an A minor scale. And then you can hear there's little skips. So is a pattern that's in about 6 notes into that phrase. So maybe we can focus in on that pattern because that's different. The first part is essentially an A minor 6th arpeggio, as we'll see when we start to break this music down a little bit closer. All right. One of the keys is we want to do this in what's called spaced repetition. So it's bad practice. Your brain isn't going to learn it as efficiently, as effectively, if you just play it over and over and over and over again for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and you spend, a chunk of your practice time in consecutive fashion just playing that phrase over and over again. What's really going to be key is that we want to break it up into what's called spaced repetition. And so we'll play this, we'll work on this riff, maybe a little other parts of it for about 5 minutes, then we'll move on to something else. Maybe we'll work on scales or arpeggios or another etude, and then we'll come back to it. So what I suggest is setting a timer. It's really easy to say, yeah, I will get onto this and play it, and I will dedicate myself to playing it in 15 minutes. And then we get on to something else and we completely forget about it. Set a timer. When the timer goes off, play that section over again and do what you just did. But resist the temptation each time to just jack up the tempo and start playing it faster and faster. Really try and get a tempo that you're comfortable playing where you get all the notes correct, and use that tempo for each of your 3 repetitions. And you want to shoot for 3 repetitions of these difficult passages each practice session, okay? One of the next things that we want to do is, after we've really kind of learned the finger positions, we've gone through it slowly, and we've determined, all right, based on that, here's some trouble spots. We want to try and start memorizing. Go into it with the active mindset that we are going to memorize the difficult passages. If you look at this 1, 2, 3 measures, there's 40 notes in that run. It's going to be almost impossible to sight read 30-second notes, 40 notes consecutively, and hope that we can play it at the correct tempo. So what we want to do is memorize it, okay? Well, we can simply play through and try and memorize it through multiple repetitions, right? So we'll break it up into small chunks, and we might do something like this. We know it starts on a high E, and then it goes D, C, A, F sharp, D, E, C, okay? So we'll play that little phrase and then try and memorize it. And then play it once without looking at it. And then I got to look back and see, did I make any mistakes? And I think I forgot that last E. So we could go through the entire 40-note phrase like that, break it down into 6 or 8 note chunks, and try and memorize it. But that's still memorizing 40 different notes, and that's one phrase out of, what, a 4 or 5 page piece, and there's lots of phrases like that in this piece. So what's a better way to try and memorize it? Well, we've got to come up with some kind of shorthand. Our brains are really efficient at memorization when we can chunk information together. So for example, if we take a series of random numbers, 1, 4, 9, 2, we can memorize 4 numbers relatively easily. But if we were to try and say memorize 3 sets of 4 numbers and get 12 numbers, our brain starts having issues. But what if there's a shorthand? 1492, well, we can remember the phrase, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And regardless of what we think of Columbus, the phrase, the mnemonic, still works quite well. So if we can associate groups or separate individual letters, numbers, in this case music notes, into something of an easier to remember chunk, then it becomes a much easier task to memorize. So in music, those chunks are going to be things like arpeggios, scales, maybe it's alternating thirds, those kinds of things. So let's look at this passage in a little more detail. So the first part, E, D, C, well, that's the kind of the start of a scale. It might be an E scale since it starts on E, but we know that there are flats, so it'd have to be E minor. It has a sharp in it, so it's possible it could be E minor. We know that instead of 4 sharps, it's only going to have 1 sharp. So E minor might be a pretty good guess here. And so E, D, C would be the start of a descending E minor scale. And then we're going to skip a couple notes, and it goes. So we're skipping an interval, 1 note in between. So we're playing thirds there. And what kind of pattern has thirds? Arpeggios. So when we look at that, it is some form of arpeggio, whether it's an E minor. The other possibility is A minor. And as we'll look at another run here in just a minute, another part of this phrase, A minor is going to be a good guess. So let's keep looking. But for now, we can break it into the first 3 notes as a scale, and then the next part as an arpeggio. So E, D, C is the scale, and then the next 4 are the arpeggio. Okay? Now at that point, it's going to go into these little skips. It's going to go D, E, C, D, B, C. Okay? So we can memorize that as essentially a 6-note pattern. So we can add that into it. Now the next part, again, we're going to have thirds. And so we pretty much can look at that and think it's probably an arpeggio of some kind. Okay? This one's going to start on the C, then there's an A, an F sharp, and a D. And so when we look at that, again, it could be E minor. It could also, again, be A minor. In this case, it would be A minor 6, because there's no G in that phrase, right, the 7th, but there is the 6th, the F sharp. So if we look at that as an arpeggio, then we can remember simply C, A, F sharp, D. Then we have another repeating kind of seconds, right? So we have the D, E, then it lowers, C, D, and then it lowers another step, B, C. So again, we have a repeat of that prior little motif where it goes da, 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 right? So now let's try and put the whole thing together. Okay, and then again we can look at the music to just try and cement that again in our head. And the key is that we want to do multiple repetitions without looking at the music. Don't worry if you make a mistake the first time around. Give it 2 or 3 chances, and then if you keep making the same mistake, you can't remember a note, then look back at the music. What this is doing is it's giving your brain a chance to kind of go back into long-term memory, which at this point, okay? And so this is going to help us really remember how to play this difficult phrase. Now the next section, when we start on the low A natural, again, we're going up in thirds. A natural, C, D natural, F sharp, A, and then we just have a little variation in the pattern where we have a C, a D, an F sharp, an A, a C, okay? So what is that pattern? Well, it starts on an A, so let's see if we can make some sense of it. What scale has mostly naturals but has an F sharp? Well, when we think of A minor, that's going to have a number of similarities, right? A minor is the relative minor of C major. No sharps or flats. Well, that's a pretty good bet. I suppose it could be G major, right, with one F sharp, but there's no G. Let's focus in on A minor. What form of A minor would have an F sharp in it? Well, the F is the 6th, and most of the notes are in thirds, so it's probably an arpeggio. It's an A minor arpeggio, but it has the 6th, so it's an A minor 6 chord. So this part is the A minor 6. All right, there's a D in there. So we need to note that there is one funky note, right? So the D doesn't belong to the A minor 6, but as long as we can remember that one note, the rest of it is simply A minor 6. It goes from low A, or an A1, to a high C, a C3. So we know we're playing an A minor 6 with a middle D in there. Okay. So we'll play now to memorize it. We've got to get from one part to the next, so let's play through that whole phrase. Okay, so this is how we start to memorize this difficult passage. Now, the end of it, the first part of it, again, is a descending A minor 6. And ends on, okay, we're going to throw in that D again. Now we have a little scalar pattern. So we have a few notes that goes from D down to the A, back up to the C. So that's the scalar pattern. So we're going to descend starting on the arpeggio and then play a little scalar pattern. And then finally we're going to have a skip up to an E and a D. Again, that doesn't really have a pattern to it, so we just got to memorize it. E, D, and F sharp. And as you can tell, because we've been playing a scale, the skip up to the E and then the descent from the D to the F sharp are going to be the two most challenging skips for us to play at the end of that run. So this is a part where we might want to play it over and over relatively slowly. So you can see that's how we're going to approach both memorization and how to really pick up the speed. Now again, once I've worked through this, I'm going to put it away. I'm going to go work on something else for the next 15 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and try and play it from memory, and I'm probably going to make mistakes, but that's okay. We're trying to, that practice of retrieving it from our memory is really going to help cement it in our long-term memory. This is the step that really most clarinet players and frankly most musicians are missing in their practice routine. So the next time that you have a challenging passage, utilize some of these tips and see what your results are. I think it'll come a lot quicker and a lot better. You're going to be able to play it much faster, especially if you have it committed to memory. All right, thanks again for watching the Clarinet Connection. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel and tune in next time.